Welcome to The Inspired Creative, the podcast for people who need a little help getting inspired or staying motivated to explore their creative side. My name is Paula Casill, and today I have a very special guest on the show that I'm really excited about, who just happens to be my little brother, Michael Casill. Say hi to everybody, Mike.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited that you're here. I can't even tell you. Now, for those of you who are listening to us for the first time, we want to say welcome aboard. And to everybody who's come back, thank you for coming back and listening to our show. Please feel free to subscribe on whatever it is that you listen to podcasts on, whether it's Apple Podcast or Stitcher or wherever you are, where you found us. We're on YouTube. We love having you. We love getting your feedback. So please feel free to keep on coming in and listening. Tell a friend. We want to grow this podcast. We want to encourage as many people as possible. But we like to start off every episode of the podcast with a quote. And today's quote is by David Ogilvy, who is a major tycoon and pioneer of advertising, for those of you who don't know. And he says, "Big ideas come from the unconscious, but your unconscious has to be well informed or your idea will be irrelevant. Stuff your conscious mind with information, then unhook your rational thought process." And this is such an interesting perspective on creativity in general, I think. But I like this idea of the marrying of the two, between the creative mind and the conscious rational thought and the exploration of information. So today we want to sit and talk about feeding our creative minds and taking the initiative to actively look into things that feed our creativity, that inspire us to get creative, and to allow ourselves and to push ourselves to go that extra mile to do these things. Now, Michael, you're a singer, a songwriter. You play the guitar, right?
I play the guitar and the bass.
Okay, so yeah, you're a musician, singer, songwriter. I also write some music sometimes. I occasionally sing when forced to. So we sort of came to this conversation sort of from the same perspective. So we're going to talk about it today in terms of music, but of course this applies to anything that you do that's creative. So this can apply to sewing or podcasting or blogging or acting or writing or painting or sculpting or whatever it is that inspires you, that you love to do creatively. This can apply to all of it, but we're going to talk in terms of music because music is something that we know, right? So what inspires you to go out and write some new music? How do you get involved in a new song? What does it for you?
I started about a year ago playing with a band where we have a songwriter with a lot of original music and just a lot of creativity that he brought to the table. Mm-hmm. And I started kind of feeding off of that. So it was one of my inspirations. Before then, most of my musical experience had been things other people had already written,
right.
Covers of songs I knew and loved, and I would just sit there and play them and sing them because I wanted to hear them, and I liked that I was able to create those sounds.
So here's a question for you. How did you get involved with music to begin with?
As a child, as you know, we grew up in a very musical family.
Yeah.
Our mother was always, had a keyboard or a guitar, or was always singing us songs in the car, making stuff up. I remember our phone number was a song, our address was a song, but
there was music around us a lot as a kid. But you didn't take lessons when you were really young.
Never did, no. I was self-taught. I wanted to take an instrument in school, and I was not focused enough on my school, they said, to branch out beyond that. So I was 20 years old. I had a really good friend at the time who was a phenomenal guitar player. Still is. He's a gigging musician. He plays 5 or 6 nights a week still. Oh. But I told him I always kind of wanted to play. He said, "Well, do it."
Yeah.
What are you waiting for? I said, "Really?" He goes, Yeah. Get a guitar, pick it up. Learn a chord, learn another chord. So that was kind of the progression. I learned. I watched the DVD that came with the acoustic guitar I bought. I learned how to play 3 or 4 chords. I turned that into what songs can you play with those. Then I kind of started building on that. And
this was all just on your own?
More or less. This was a little before the popularization of YouTube. This was before you could find anything, just anything you wanted on there. So I was kind of left to my own devices. I could go on the internet and find tablature and all that. But a lot of what I've learned is just playing by ear.
So then years go by, you've been playing on your own, you join a band, you're with this guy who has his own creative vibe, I guess. And did you start by collaborating with him? Did you guys write music together? Or did just his presence in your life sort of send you off and open this door for you?
Well, a lot of the process with the band was we would get together and just start playing. And just kind of get into a space and, either zone out or, he would wander off and do something while I was holding a line down, or, we would just kind of all play off of each other. And sometimes, a couple of those grooves we came up with ended up growing into songs. And I got a chance to see what you could make out of that with a little application.
Right, that makes sense. And when you reached that point where you suddenly realized, hey, I can actually do this, songwriting is a possibility for me, did you then go off and write music of your own? Do you prefer to work with other people?
Well, we have collaborated a few times creating songs, but really the first time I quote unquote wrote a song, I was just sitting at home playing the guitar by myself, and just a line kind of stuck out to me, and so I played it again. I played it a couple hundred more times, and it just, over the course of the next 5 hours, till I was ready to drop of exhaustion at 3 a.m.
Oh, wow.
And by that point I had the bones of the song together, and then over the next 2 or 3 days, the structure and the lyrics kind of came together. But it was just like, I just took that wave and wrote it.
Right.
And that's where I ended up.
That's kind of exciting, though.
And that was the last time it happened quite like that.
Thankfully, because that sounds like a kind of an arduous process. Well, let's talk about an arduous process, because I understand that all too well. Having written a few songs myself, some of which I like, some of which still make me cringe, I know that sometimes it can be a little hard, even if you have an idea for, let's say, like a chorus, right? You have a really catchy hook or something like that, to then flesh it out and turn it into a full song. So what do you do when you get stuck? How do you help yourself creatively to move forward and build what you know has to be there?
That's a good question. Again, these things can come together over the course of a couple hours, or sometimes it's over the course of a couple weeks.
Yeah.
So sometimes the best thing for me to do is to play a song I already wrote, or a different song I already know, or put the guitar down and go take a walk, or play a song that sounds kind of like it to see why this one's different than that one. Right. Or go read a book, put something on. Sometimes just taking a break is the best thing you can do at a certain point.
I think that that's very true, because I find, for me personally, when I focus, like hyper focus on something, sometimes that's very helpful, and sometimes it helps me push through, and sometimes I just feel like I'm getting stuck, and I realize that I need to just give myself time. And if you give yourself enough time, what I've found is eventually your unconscious mind, I guess, is still working on it in the background, and eventually you come up with the solution that you didn't know you had. Mm-hmm. And you're right, sometimes it happens quickly. Those are great times. Sometimes it takes a while. Mm-hmm. But when we're doing that, we're going through the process of writing something new, creating something new, building something new from scratch. What do you find helps you with finding new inspiration, new creativity? Where do you get that creative juice from?
I guess you draw from your life. You don't really have anything else to draw from, so it's really what you let in, right? And that's kind of the amalgam that creates who you are and your bag of experiences that you have to dig from.
And that's a good point, because I think to bring it back to the quote that we started with, when Mr. Ogilvy was saying, big ideas come from the unconscious, he says the unconscious has to be well informed or your ideas are meaningless. So the idea that I'm going to presume and project a little bit, but I'm assuming that what he's saying is it's the more you have to draw from, the more you know already, the more you've experienced, and the more that you have taken in, the more you can then put out. And the stronger your base is for creating something new. And maybe you've experienced this, maybe you haven't. But have you ever had a song where you're listening to a song, you're like, I could write something like that? Mm-hmm. Or, I really like that, I should write my version of that.
Or, man, that's so good, I wish I had written that.
That idea of understanding what high art looks like, or what really moves you, or what you absolutely love and are always drawn to. I think that that's a really important thing to be able to identify. Even if it's not on a grand scale where you're like, I love opera, but to be able to say, this song, every time I listen to this song, it makes me happy, or this piece of art, or this movie, or this book. And it doesn't have to be something that's necessarily connected to your art. I think that there are ways of drawing inspiration from places that are completely unrelated to you. A photograph can inspire a song. Do you have anything like that? Like a favorite song, a favorite book, a favorite painting, something that you know that you just love?
I have a screensaver on my TV.
I have to admit, I wasn't expecting that.
It sounds ridiculous, but I'll leave it on, and it's just these gorgeous vistas, different kinds of nature, whether it's forests or oceans or mountains or wildlife, and just it kind of puts the majesty of the earth on display.
Wow. And that's where you go.
Sometimes I go there. I like reading books about the universe. I don't really understand physics, but I like reading and watching things that explain that, to just kind of put really the perspective around the dot that you are, and to see a little bit of the whole of which you comprise a piece.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's interesting because you and I, obviously being siblings and coming from the same household and having the same parents and the same experiences, I think we have a similarity in the way that we approach life. We're both very active. We both have our hobbies, but neither of us really sits back and like, my goal in life is to be an actor or a whatever.
I was not the artsy guy in school.
But we both came from this place where we have a very logical parent and a very emotive parent. And so we sort of saw both sides of reality when we were growing up. Our father is very rational, for lack of a better term.
Mom used to call him a Vulcan.
Yes.
Emotionless.
She said she married
very
Spock.
Calculating.
Yeah. And she is the polar opposite of that. She is incredibly driven by her emotions and her feelings, and in a good way. I don't want to make it sound like she's a crazy person, but she is very in touch with how she feels about things and how things move her. And we grew up in a house where we were always listening to classical music and watching Shakespeare and reading books. Our house was filled with books. So the
and potpourri and beautiful pictures and
the sewing machine was always out, and we were always doing something weirdly crafty, and it was just how we grew up. And I think it's interesting because we both definitely have more, I think, our father's personality, in that we aren't necessarily naturally creative people. But having grown up in such a creatively expressive environment, we've sort of found a way to marry the two.
Well, I think in a lot of ways it's one way I would describe our mom is sensual, in that very in touch with all of her senses, and in a lot of ways just loves to feed that.
Yeah.
That's what moves her. And I think everybody has access to that, whether they know how to get in touch with it or dig it out, or they choose to acknowledge it, or historically, I try to ignore it, or stuff it down like men are taught to do. Take those feelings and hide them deep, deep away. a lot of things are just being able to feel those things.
Yeah, and like you said, acknowledge them. And I think that is a really healthy way to live, because one of the main inspirations for this podcast was the idea that everyone has a creative side. Everyone needs a creative outlet, and not everyone will necessarily identify themselves as a, quote, creative person, unquote, but we all have creativity. We were born, I think, with the need to make something new. And whether you want to call that spiritual or biological or whatever, the need to perpetuate and to make the world a more beautiful place and a more fulfilling place for other people is just part of who we are as a species. And opening up that door is one of the most fulfilling things that we can do as people. And so when we're looking at creativity, I think sometimes people get frustrated and overwhelmed when they feel like they don't have an idea, or they have no inspiration, or they started working on a project and it didn't go the way they wanted to, and so now they're feeling stuck. So what would you say to somebody who's in that process, right? They're learning something for the first time, or they're doing something that they've never done before, or something that they do all the time, but they hit a roadblock. What would you say to them to help them understand, or to inspire them to find their creativity? What do you do that works for you?
Well, first thing I thought of when you were saying that is, if you're starting something new, don't be afraid of sucking. It's going to happen, and if it was worth doing well, it's worth learning. Mm-hmm. And if everybody was good at it automatically, it probably wouldn't be worth learning.
That's true.
So it's important to not put a value judgment on how good you are at something, especially when you're relatively new, but even going forward. And then, when I find myself stuck with something, a lot of times it's just fine. It just, you could put whatever you have down, and you don't have to put a judgment on it. You don't have to say this is good or this stinks. It's just where you're at today. Yeah.
And I think it's very important for us to give ourselves permission to walk away from projects for a little while. Mm-hmm. And to, like this quote says, feed our creativity. If you feel a little dry, if there's nothing left to give, mm-hmm. maybe what you need to do is to take some time and find what works for you and what feeds you creatively, whether it's watching a movie or going and seeing a play or listening to your favorite song or whatever the case may be, or in your case, watching your favorite screensaver, mm-hmm. reading your favorite book, but to recharge your own creativity. And sometimes that's as simple as getting around other creative people and letting yourself feed off of their energy. Mm-hmm. Because I find a lot of times what I need more than anything is just to sit back and not put it on myself and let somebody else be the creative person for a little while and mm-hmm. see what they're coming up with and their new ideas and get inspired by the fact that they're doing something great, which is interesting because that's exactly how you got into songwriting to begin with, was being around somebody else who had that drive.
Yeah, and it occurred to me over the last few days of just kind of, as you've been saying, just been not, when I sit down to write, I just haven't been coming up with what I want to. Yeah. And I think part of it has been I haven't been with my guitar player and singer for a little while. Mm. The band's on a little bit of everybody's got their own lives going on, so we haven't been able to meet regularly. But I think, being around people that inspire you, people that help you tap into that piece of you, mm-hmm. Maybe people that have more feeling, right? Right. Kind of bring you to that spot more.
It's crazy. Well, it's not crazy, but it's really interesting because just this last week, I finally got the Instagram going up for the podcast, and my personal Instagram is very curated, I guess is the way to put it. I have people on there that I follow who I'm close to, people whose lives I care about, and people who post things that I'm afraid I won't see, like on Facebook. On Facebook, I'm friends with everybody, but sometimes stuff gets lost. So I have a very limited number of people that I follow on my personal Instagram. So I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with the blog's Instagram, and I started following a couple of hashtags about creativity and making things. And as I did that, I started following a lot of people, and I realized as I was going through, I was looking at Instagram photos from bakers and artists and knitters and quilters and people who owned Etsy shops and musicians and yoga instructors. And it was this vast array of people, all of whom have an active creative life that they were sharing on Instagram. That's how I found them. And just looking at them and going through this feed and following them and liking their photos, I felt more creative. I felt like I wanted to go out and do. It provoked me to want to go out and make something new. I want my sewing machine back. My sewing machine is broken. I wanted to pull out my paint set. It made me want to go try something new in the kitchen just looking at an Instagram feed. And so if that works for you, go out and do that. If going to the local bar and listening to the local musicians playing on a Friday night works for you, go out and do that. Whatever it is that inspires you and provokes you and feeds your creative soul, don't be afraid to give yourself time to be recharged, to be revamped, to find your creative voice again, because that's what it's all about. Is not only creating something new, but being with people or experiencing people or being in the environment where that is not only okay, but it's celebrated. So whoever you are and whatever it is that you do, we really want to encourage you, go out and find your inspiration. All right, we're going to end this podcast. I think on that note, it's a good place to end. But before we go, I got to ask, do you have any final thoughts? What is the takeaway that you would want people who are listening to this to remember as they're leaving? If they take one thing from this whole conversation, what would it be?
I think one of the things that has helped me the most over time is just to not be afraid of the result. Just kind of the production of things is, just be in the moment. Don't worry about where it goes. Don't worry about what it becomes. Don't stress the details. Just be where you are and let it take you where you're going.
Absolutely. And I think if I had one takeaway from all of this, it would be that you shouldn't be afraid of seeking out the things that inspire you to create something more. So if people want to follow you and see what you're up to these days, because you have your hands in a lot of different pies, where can they follow you on social media? Do you have a Facebook or Instagram or anything like that you're comfortable with people seeing on a regular basis?
Okay, well, my personal Instagram is MJCEHM_JAY_SEA. Pretty clever play on my initials.
I'm sorry, spell it one more time in case they want to hear and they actually want to follow you.
EHM_JAY_SEA. And we have the band has an Instagram also, Psychotropics Rock. That's Psychotropics with an X. And it's intentionally not pronounced psychotropics. It's not drug specific. But I'm sure you can find a whole bunch of interesting material on them.
That's awesome. So if you want to follow me, you can get me on Facebook or on Instagram or on Gmail. It's all the same across all three. It's the Inspired Creative Pod. So find us on Facebook. If you like Facebook, you can follow me on Instagram. I post stuff up there pretty much 2 or 3 times a week. Or if you have any thoughts or any feedback or you want to share something or you have a question, send me an email. I love getting email. I love getting responses, and I definitely want to hear back from you guys. And if you could do me a really big favor, whatever you're listening to this on, whatever app you're using, whether it's Apple Podcasts or whether it's Stitcher or SoundCloud or wherever you are, if you could just take 1 minute at the end of this to quickly rate and review us, it would help so much with other people finding the podcast. It boosts us in the algorithms and the search engines, and it just makes it so much easier. So if you could do that, that would be a really big favor, and I would really appreciate it. But whatever you do this week and whatever you think of this podcast, I just want to say go out there and let's make the world a more better place, a more beautiful place, a more inspiring place for one another. Go out, get inspired, be creative. Hi, everybody. I know you're probably wondering why the podcast is over and there's still like 5 minutes left on your feed. Well, as we finished wrapping up and finished the recording, Michael and I were talking, and we realized that it was a really silly thing for us not to include some of his music in this podcast episode, especially since we spent the entire episode talking about how we write music and the process that he went through to learn how to write, to learn how to play. So I had him grab his guitar really quick, and he did a quick recording of one of his latest singles. And I apologize for the recording itself. That's not his fault. That's me. The equipment wasn't really prepared for that. So it's still a beautiful song, and I'd love for you to stick around and check it out. And when you're done, let him know what you think. Let him know if you love it. Let him know if you want to, hear more. I'm sure he'd love to hear the encouragement, just like all of us would. So yeah, enjoy.
You're the worst part of me. Much as I run, I can't hide. I'd shake you off and be free, but both my arms have been tied. I'm in the palm of your hands. I'm something less than a man. Naked before you I stand, and I await your command. I'm only living for the moment I can touch the source. I'm begging on my knees, and if you give in, then I'll just want more. The call of the siren will always steer my ship off course. It's powerful and violent, instincts you won't require me. You deafen me with silence, and you get up and you walk out the door. You wanna get a reaction? Don't blink, just look in my eye. My soul split into fractions while my pain multiplies. Submission, your satisfaction. To your will I must comply. I'd run, but I got no traction, so just give in to the lie. I'm only living for the moment I can touch the source. I'm begging on my knees, and if you give in, then I'll just want more. The call of the siren will always steer my ship off course. It's powerful and violent, instincts you won't require me. You deafen me with silence, and you get up and you walk out the door. Dealing with these broken wings is easier than flying. I can't stop myself, I think I've gone too far this time. Dealing with the devil from the bottom of the deck. I know I shouldn't be here, but I got no self-respect. I'm only living for the moment I can touch the source. Been begging on my knees, and if you're giving, then I'll just want more. The call of of the siren will always steer my ship off course. It's powerful and violent, instinctual requirement, deafening me with silence, and get up and you walk out the door.